nothing that's going on today hasn't gone on before, right? So it's okay just to be who you are and love yourself. And so I do want to talk about a few other interesting sections in her book. I'm going to come to you in a second, but I know Satish has been patiently waiting, so I'm just going to go to him for a quick question.
Thank you. I haven't read your book, so I have this disadvantage. But have you heard, I'm trying to understand, do you write because you research, or because you want to change something, you feel, or you sort of self-expression? There are many reasons we write for. What drives you?
I think I've wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. So writing, is what is my sort of soul. That's what I live for. But this particular book, as I started to write it, it was not only about me. It was not about my point of view. This book has my point of views definitely, but this book is full of other people's interviews and other voices, right? Other women's voices. So there is a lot of conflict going on inside the book, because what one woman would say, another woman would completely disagree with. And I want that to exist because women are not a monolith, right? So we don't agree with each other. And I find there is value and there is something productive that can come out of those disagreements if we listen to each other. So what I want my book to do is to help women to listen to each other, which is what I encourage. I say, you may not disagree with this, but just listen to her. Because as long as we are bashing each other up, we're not going to smash the patriarchy. We have to be allies. So that's where the book went. And so I wrote this book for a generation of women, I think for the younger generations coming after me, and hopefully my generation as well.
I think he was trying to figure out what drives you, Sindhu. What drives you?
Oh my God, that's like an existential question which I cannot answer just yet. I can think of nothing else when I wake up. Like I'm just like I get obsessed with certain ideas. So it can sometimes it's like there are years when I'm just obsessed with like objects. I'm like thinking about how to describe that object, and then there are years I'm obsessed with. Right now it's gender and sexuality. So it changes. The topic changes, but I get obsessed very easily.
Thank you. That's your driving force.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
It was more of a comment and a question, I guess, about the matriarchal power structures. I feel like some of the systemic problems we have is those matriarchal power structures are built on the patriarchy. They're there to find a way to work around the patriarchy, and it instead has a feedback loop of damaging the female kind of point of view in a way, is how I look at it. I'm curious how you look at that matriarchal power structure that we were just talking about.
So that's again the interesting thing, right? Because my research was about India, and within India, depending on cultures, depending on which part of the country it's from, it's so diverse. Like, and the matriarchal structure of one place is not the same as the matriarchal structure of another place. So I could not say anything as a blanket statement, because nothing would do justice to the sort of diversity that exists in India. So I was reading this, Peggy, I think Peggy Reeves is her name. She is an anthropologist who studies matriarchal cultures in Southeast Asia. And what she said was it's called the Mingakanablu tribe, I think. So she studied them, and she said in their matriarchal culture, matriarchal power was not about this woman being powerful. Of course she's powerful, everybody would listen to her, but the power was used so everybody could be free. Like it's not a patriarchal society where it does not matter who is your father. It's not about perpetuating the male line. So when that's not the case, there's so much freedom in a society, because it all starts with that perpetuating that male line. So then the women have to sort of go, to the man who is in power. So for me, I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but I just want to say that, there is a lot of, differences, and you're right too, because that happens as well. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. So your chapter on beauty was very fascinating. So this is all my kind of experience as well. So I resonate with Cheryl Punj, right? So she says, I would always make sure that I carry an extra shrug or shawl when I knew I would be wearing something slightly risque. Self-love, it would seem, can take many forms and can be achieved through many routes. What, according to you, is the best way to express self-love? How do you get to that point of, I'm beautiful and I love myself?
I got a lot of flack for writing that chapter in this book from like proper feminists, because they're like, why would you write about beauty? Like, who cares? Like, you know. And I'm like, the whole point is that all women do not have to agree with any one point of view. And I've interviewed various women in the book, and in the chapter Beauty, it's about women with transgressive bodies, not necessarily the norm of what's considered beautiful by society. And these women have told me how, you know, some women are body neutral, where they do not care about, you know, how the body looks or any of that. There are body positive people who are like, whatever my body is, I love it and I will, you know,
own it.
Yes, own it. And there are women who are conventionally, according to society, are beautiful and who take full advantage of that and like make money from it or whatever they want, you know, influence and take that. And I don't judge any of these women. For me, all these women's points of view are valid. You know, they're making the most of whatever they can. They're making sense to themselves, you know. And I don't judge any women. And for me, the beauty industry, I've interviewed women from the beauty industry as well. And women who are in the beauty industry talk about the sort of complexes they have and sort of doubt, self-doubt about like actresses and models, and about how they have self-doubt about how they look. And it's so similar to somebody who's not a model or not, you know, doing that. So these are problems that all of us as women have, and I'm sure even men have these days. In fact, the beauty industry is becoming gender neutral in the sense that men are so obsessed with like, you know, beauty. My partner has more beauty products than I do, honestly. Like, you know that. Yeah, so it's like, so yeah, so my daughter's growing up in that house where, you know, her mom does not.
And your daughter's 6.
She's 6, yeah. And she is so, I mean, I'm so happy with her. They had a duck in their school, and she was like, they didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, and she said we should call it they, and I'm like, oh, I'm so proud. So, but yeah, so with beauty, I think self-expression. I also look at fashion as a way of self-expression, and especially for you know, queer folks. And for women and for men, and that's something that came with colonialism, I must say, because before that, men and women in India, everybody, and non-men and non-women would all dress up. Like everybody wore jewelry, everybody wore makeup. You know, it was not like gendered. It was Victorian morality that made us think, oh my God, men should not wear jewelry, or men should not wear mascara, or, you know, men should like. And that's the British doing this to our way of thinking. You know, Indian way of thinking. I can say our here, okay. So Indian way of thinking, and I think we still carry those problems today, and we think, oh, beauty is not like, oh, beauty is for everybody, you know. So that's where I'm going with that.
No, and associating beauty with self-love, that's a tricky thing as well, right? Because inner beauty, outer beauty, there's many layers to that. There's a very fascinating part in your book, again, I'd love for you to read, is about your ancestral.
Oh yes, definitely. Can you tell me the page number?
So I think it's this one, right? Yes, it's the personal anecdote.
Yeah, it's 216. Yeah, that's easier. Thank you. So one of the other things I look at in the book is that in conventional Indian feminism, we do not consider believers to be good feminists. So you cannot be a believer and be a good feminist because you believe in the patriarchy, you believe in religion, in a sense. So in this book, I argue that women can be believers and can still be feminists. Because I mean, who decides, right? Can you say a Muslim woman cannot be a feminist because she's Muslim and she believes in Allah? Or like a Hindu woman cannot be a feminist because she believes in, you know, Vishnu or Shiva or Shakti or whatever? And a Christian woman cannot be, you know, goes on. So, and it's like only Buddhism is okay in India at the moment to be, it's like a pop feminist, religion, which is okay. So I take umbrage with that, and I argue for that in the book. And I come from an intercaste family, So, which is again something I talk about in the book. I'm part Dalit and I'm part Iyengar, which has been a very sort of complicated caste identity to have. All of you who are Indian here know what caste is and what it is like. So I've always had to deal with that, right? And one of the things I did to talk about how caste, religion and all of that, and belief, I think belief is also very rooted to mothers passing on to daughters. At least in my family, that's what I've realized. And my Dalit great-grandmother was a devout woman. She believed, and she would pray to Amman, who's Kali, who's a version, the indigenous version of Shakti. So she built a temple in her village, and she was a matriarch. And she built a temple in her village for Kali. Or Amman, as we call her. So you want me to read that out?
Please, yeah.
Okay. So I would just read it from here. More often than not, our religious, I think I should start from here. For one thing, Hinduism isn't built on one text alone. Not everybody follows the Manusmriti in their spiritual or daily lives. Hinduism, after all, is an amalgamation of varied beliefs and customs from across the subcontinent. More often than not, our religious philosophies are what we learn from our foremothers. Faiths and traditions are passed down generation after generation through women. It would seem that female religiosity isn't always a consequence of Brahmanism, but can have other roots too. For perspective, let me give you a personal example. My matriarchal Dalit great-grandmother was a devout woman. In fact, she built a temple in her village for goddess Amman, the malevolent aspect of the Divine Mother, a family deity. The temple still stands, as does my faith in the primeval energy of Shakti. I'm a believer too. What's interesting is that it was in my great-grandmother's time that the Dravidian self-respect movement grew in Tamil Nadu. She and the women after her must have been inspired by the anti-caste crusade and the nascent feminism that enveloped the state. However, despite the movement's atheistic underpinnings, they continued to believe, my great-grandmother and grandmother and other women, they opposed caste and sexist bigotry but still propagated their faith in the divine. Perhaps this is to do with keeping their female traditions. Of course, this is one story of one family. Not all Dalit women are believers. Several are agnostic or atheist. Many have consciously left casteist Hinduism to convert to other more egalitarian faiths, for there's no denying the obnoxious side of caste Hinduism. As a result of Varnashrama, the practices of so-called upper castes groups are venerated as superior to others. I've been witness to this too as a member of an intercaste family where every traditionally conducted wedding ceremony requires months of negotiation to ensure that nobody's caste rituals are undermined. Because by default, Brahmins expect their rituals to take precedence over others. Yeah.
Casteism in India.
Yeah.
Segue to what we were talking about earlier, Sarvanic feminism and Islamic feminism.
Right. Okay. I mean, this is like a topic which is so deep. It's like Savarna feminism. And so in India, feminism is very, there are so many types of feminism. And at the moment, there is a lot of friction between what would be Savarna feminism and Dalit feminism, or Islamic feminism, or atheistic feminism. So there are so many versions, and they all sort of have issues with each other. So I don't know exactly which to go into. So if you could or we could ask the audience to see if they are, anybody wants to go into any of those aspects.
You decide. You are the author.
Okay. I mean, I can just tell you what the issues are among these competing feminisms. So the main thing is always religion. The main thing is belief. Obviously, Savarna feminists who happen to be Hindu feminists and Islamic feminists, Muslim women, they all believe, right? And right now, Dalit feminism, they're anti-Hindu in a sense, anti-Hindutva really, but anti-religion too in a sense, because obviously Hinduism can be very casteist. So there are all these competing versions. So where you stand in this whole, matrix really determines who is your ally and who isn't. But in the book, my main goal in this book is to say that don't denigrate somebody else for their beliefs. You respect them for their positionality, where they're coming from. This is what they believe in, but it doesn't mean that you have to have the same beliefs or whatever. So my whole point is to say listen to each other. So I think I'll leave it at that.
No, that's
yeah.
That's the crux of everything. Yes.
I grew up in the U.S. and I studied with diaspora, and I was wondering if any of your research came across about Western feminism that Indian Americans have sort of like absorbed. So there's a little bit of a confluence as well as like a contrast in how progressive Indian feminism is versus like it's very nascent Indian American women's idea of feminism, because we have to base it in the context of like East-West as well as first wave, second wave, third wave.
Yeah.
So did you come across anything that spoke to those differences?
Yeah, I mean that's. I actually first I realized.
I read your book, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I realized this when there's I think it's called Brown Girl Bookshelf.
Yes.
So they read my book and they reviewed it, and the person who read it was Indian American, and she said she'd never heard about caste till she read my book, and then she said, oh my God, like what is all of this like, so it was it opened up a lot of sort of ideas for her, and yes, I think now living in the UK, I see that too over there as well, like how brown women, what is the feminism that they have, and as opposed to what is white feminism. I think the biggest problem that what I see happening is a marginalization, right? And it's the sort of thing, that same thing that happens in India with what Dalit feminists fight for or what Islamic feminists fight for. Same thing, they're marginalized. So whatever is the sort of mainstream narrative is usually the more, whichever culture has had center presidents for so long that they take all the space, and there is no space for other versions to exist in the same space, which is the main problem. I hope that sort of answers your question. I see those sort of similarities, and yeah, I think Indian Americans who read the book have said that I never knew about all of these things. And the other thing that I really think my book does is that I hate this narrative of brown woman or third world woman as victim. It's a horrible trope. It's a colonial trope which still exists. I mean, it shouldn't. So, and I think this book sort of says it's not the case at all. Like, look at these women's lives. Look at how they fight. They're fighters. They're survivors. That's how we should look at them. I see them as agents. I mean, obviously they are victims of this patriarchal society, but that's not what I focus on. So yeah, I hope that.
No, that's
yeah.
Which was your hardest chapter to write? Was it the last one?
Let me think.
The last chapter is, it says society, sanskar and choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I could say that was, one of the, I think the hardest chapter to write for me was probably the one about gender and sexuality, the one that's called, I forget what it's called. Let's see. It's called Demystifying the Feminine. Yeah, so that was a hard one to write, because to put a lot of those thoughts into words took time, because they're complicated, sort of emotions and feelings and bodily experiences that women have, that how do you sort of put those into words? So that was probably the hardest.
Imagine writing this for the world. This is just India, right? Scotland,
Yeah.
right? Of course, you've taken a lot of views from women everywhere.
Yes.
Right? I want to open this up. Of course, we've been keeping it very interactive. Yeah, Rajiv?
General question. Who do you think, contemporary and historical figure, you think is working towards this smashing the patriarchy, as you call it?
I mean, the idea was to say that there are so many women doing that.
Yeah, but
so I wouldn't. I mean, I could give you examples. She is one. I think all these women. But I wouldn't necessarily, come up with any famous names, because there is some problematic thing attached to everybody. And if I say one name, somebody's going to be like, oh no, but this person didn't endorse this or that. But yeah, and that's something that I also defend in my book. Like, people hate on Priyanka Chopra, and I'm like, she can't stand up for everything. That she is hypocritical in some aspects, but I mean, what she's done is amazing. Like what she's done, built for herself, you know. So yeah, there is one name for you. Problematic name, but I'll say it.
It's not a problematic name for me at all.
Yeah.
So most of the attitudes that we have, feminism as an absolute philosophy, or okay, let's just to stop there. Feminism as an absolute philosophy. It's usually an outcome of laws that have come into practice maybe one generation before. For example, if I am like feeling very angsty about something, angry about something, it is because of some injustice that has happened to my mother, for example. So it's, in other words, it's a reaction to loss per se, not exactly, even though it is emotional, it is rooted more in the loss of the land rather than real emotions, if you know what I mean. So in that sense, do you think altering the laws more equitably or, appropriately, equity is another very loaded word, so I don't want to address it. So rewriting the laws, do you think will solve the problem enough to say feminism is not even a remote philosophy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I've researched this in the context of India for the book. And what I've often found is India has excellent laws, actually, to protect women. It's just that women don't know they exist. Or even if they know they exist, some of them don't go to the courts. And Valli Arunachalam, who is it's kind of the Murugappa group, and the men of the family have not allowed her to take her rightful place on the board, just because she's a woman, and she's fighting in the courts for it. And I was just thinking how women who don't have access to the sort of wealth or anything to go to courts, how do they do it? So laws can exist, but unless society changes, as a whole, piece by piece, things cannot change. So the laws are very important, though. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it okay if we go to Rakesh real quick and then jump back here?
I want to revisit the subject of beauty that we talked about. First, I'm glad that you're a believer in Shakti. I'm also a Shakta. So we are united in our reverence for the primordial feminine energy that is created. So you and I are about 800 years ago, in an interesting text, there is a story of this prince who goes to his father, the king's guru. And he says, Guru, I'm at the age where my father is saying I am getting married. Tell me, who is the most beautiful woman on earth so that I can marry? And the guru looks at the prince and he says, Prince, the most beautiful woman on earth is the one that we can live the happiest.
That's a good way to put it.
What do you think?
The one you can make the happiest.
What do you think about the notion that if women can just get empowered to be able to create a societal value, that they have the right to demand happiness on their terms from the men in their lives?
Yeah.
The patriarchy will vanish?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most important thing, right? That women have the freedom to choose whether they want to marry or not marry, or whatever they want to do. I think that freedom is what so many feminists have fought for, and I think that's the thing that we really need, the freedom, right? And that's the funniest thing too, because I've seen, and this is the thing, somebody mentioned earlier about, you mentioned earlier about how some matriarchs don't give that freedom, and the funny thing is some patriarchs do. They give their, the daughters in their family so much freedom, so it's complicated. You had a...
Yeah, it's kind of a strange question, but do you think the feminist movement has served women well? Like sometimes if we are boxed in from one set of ways of thinking to another, you're supposed to think that men are sort of not good, or that they don't serve our interests, that the patriarchy is bad, and beauty is bad, and things like that. So I feel like it's restricted us, but in a different way. So do you feel that? Or?
I definitely do, and which is why I wrote this book, right? To sort of understand my own thoughts about it and what other women thought about it. And that's what a lot of women would say. In fact, a lot of Indian women, I realized, Gen Z and millennials, are scared to call themselves feminists. Because if they do, then they have to stand up to that ideal feminism, which just a bunch of people can do. And these are not academics, these are not activists. These women can't do that. Like, they're living everyday lives, you know. And they might do something which is not considered feminist. Like, I know so many women who do Karwa Chauth, and these are like very important women in the corporate world in Mumbai. And they have a Karwa Chauth party. They might not fast, but they'll still have it. So I can't, I mean, so obviously all the other women are like, oh, they're not feminists, they're doing Karwa Chauth. But these women are like, we are the women breaking down, you know, ceilings and walls and whatnot in the corporate world, but we believe in this, we do it, you know. So yeah, there is definitely that going on in boxing people.
You had a question?
To follow up on my earlier question, don't you think if the laws are applied properly, then we have the freedom to do what we please, and then, you know, ideal feminism is kind of achieved?
I mean, that's the hope, right? That's the hope that, and there is so much going on in India for that, right? There are sensitization drives where people go out into the villages or towns, and, you know, even in the cities, to let people know these laws exist. You do not have to live within these, horrible structures. You can go out if you like. And many states, it depends also in India, about some states are doing a great job in making sure that the laws are sort of, you know, sort of enacted in reality, but it's not the case all over India, and all of us know that, so I'm not going to.
You had a question?
I wanted to ask you what the process was of connecting with the voices in your book, and also how they have received the book, like how they think about it now, if you sold them copies, and if they've connected with each other.
Thank you. I mean, that's a good question, right? Because I spoke to about like hundreds of women to write the book. I think about 80 or so interviews appear in the book, and it was so many years. And the thing was, it was such a beautiful process, because I went in to write this book with my own ideas of what feminism is or what it isn't, and every woman I'd speak to, my own perception changed, you know, and I'd think a little more, and I'd think, oh, okay, maybe this is also a way to live, right? And then every woman I spoke to just broke something I had in my, and that's what I hope the book would do too, like it would break. So just to sort of say, you could think both ways, you know. So yeah, and I think after the book came out, all the people in the book have received copies, and they've been part of it, and and I told them at the get-go, the book contains all your voices, but obviously I'm putting it together so it'll have my voice as well. And I put that in the introduction, saying that this is a subjective interpretation of their voices. It does not mean that this is in the context that they thought it. I put it in this context, but maybe they didn't think it like that. And yeah, so it's a complicated thing.
So was there a reaction to, have they read the book, and, you know, what was the feedback?
Many of them have read it, I know. And yeah, I think they're happy with it. Nobody has come back to me and said, oh, you put my, thing in a place where it didn't belong. Nobody said that, so I think that's good.
That's a victory,
yes.
A small victory. Did that answer your question? Were you looking for some resources as well, or maybe grab a copy? Okay. Okay. Yes, Apna.
For all of the families that have daughters, I heard that you have a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Actually, she started writing when she was going to have her, and now she's 6 years old.
Yeah. I literally started the book when she was just born, like, yeah. So the baby and the book grew up together.
So this is a two-part question. So as you're writing this book, how much of your daughter are you thinking about in this book? And the second part of my question is, if you had to boil down maybe 2 key messages that you hope are instilled in your daughter. A lot of this will be instilled in her just through osmosis because of who you are. But if there were certain key messages that you'd want females, the generation below us to learn and absorb, what would those messages be?
I did think about my daughter a lot when I wrote it, and I thought, all the kids of that generation should read it. I think the most important message is that there is no one way to be you. There's no rule. Like, you write the rule book, essentially. And to say that don't see your female embodiment as something that's a problem, that's a source of power, according to me. To say that, I think the biggest problem is, I find that, women are born like, oh my God, she's a girl, she can't do this. I'm like, change that mindset. I mean, throw that away. You're born a girl, that's a source of power. You can do whatever you like, and there's no one way to be a girl, right? So that's what I tell my daughter, and that's what I hope in the future, that people see that there's no one way to be anything. So yeah, that's the message.
It's a great takeaway. Yes, hi.
My question is about, so when we talk about feminism, different aspects of life, you might come into a situation where you know that there is something that should be, but it's not, so you have to figure out a way to just deal with what's in front of you. And that's kind of like the difference between managing reality versus still striving for the ideal. So when both of those are contradicting each other, how do you strike that balance and say, okay, this is the reality and I can't change it, but the fundamental is this reality should not have existed in the first place. And the biggest example that comes in my mind is like safety, for example, right? So we shouldn't have to be afraid, but the reality is we are. So how do you strike the balance between, battling that, the duality of the situation?
This I briefly explore in the book as well, but not in the context of safety, which is sort of like, I agree with you, like, why should we be worried? In India, I think I saw this as a meme or something that went around saying that if you don't want girls to be assaulted in the night, just keep your boys at home in the night. Don't send them out. That's the way. But in the book, I do explore this. This was from a research paper in the UN, I think, where they talk about how that you want to feminize the structure, the entire structure, break it all down, and make the entire structure more equitable and perfect, right? So they argue in the paper that I read that if that's what we're trying to do, we're not going to achieve anything, because we're just going to be, it's like again, pushing against something so big. But if you sort of maneuver from what you have, start small and build on it, and come up with subversive strategies, which is what I argue for in the book. I'm then you'll get it done, because then you can actually topple it, even without the patriarchy realizing it's gone. That's the only way to do it, because I think when you sort of put it up against, make it like this fight of this idealistic fight, I don't see, how it's going to end. Yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you, Sindhu. Sindhu is going to be here, of course, and she has a few copies, so please feel free to interact with her once we're done. And I think, Sindhu, thanks to Rakesh, you walked away with the next title for your book. So this is Smashing the Patriarchy. We're going to do Resurfacing the Matriarchy. Resurrecting.
That would be good.
But thank you all. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me and talking about my book.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.